This morning's scripture reading is from Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 10 and verses 16 through 20. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Susan. He is risen. Well, today we're looking at one of the most important parts of the Christian faith found in the Bible. It's about when Jesus came back to life and commissioned his followers to go out and tell other people about him. Did you know that as followers of Christ, you are part of that commissioned community? Well, I'm here to tell you this morning that you are, which is why the title for this year's Easter message is Commissioned Community. You know, this part of the story is found in Matthew chapter 28, and it shows us in Jesus' resurrection message to his friends a roadmap for us to follow as followers of Christ as well. So I want to take a closer look at these verses and what they have to teach us. Now, you might be sitting here this morning thinking to yourself, "Well, Pastor, I got so many things I'm dealing with in my own life right now. I don't have time to be commissioned to do anything else. In fact, I don't even understand what I would be commissioned to do." Well, don't worry. I think we've all felt the pressure of dealing with life, right? Life has this ability to limit us. Life has the ability to tie us down, to hold us back, to keep us from becoming everything that we are supposed to become. Life has this uncanny ability to seem to always say no to every question we ask, right? For example, will I ever overcome this problem? Life says no. Will my job situation ever change? Life says no. Will I ever get back on track financially? Life says no. Will I ever fulfill the plan God has for me? Or does God even have a plan for me? Life says no. Well, if you've ever felt that way, you're actually probably in the best place you could be, because you can identify with what the women felt on that Resurrection Sunday all those years ago. You see, they were painfully aware of the limitations of life. The cross had just said no to the most awesome, abundant life they had ever known. And if that could happen to Jesus, what hope was there for them? Well, Matthew tells us they were heading to the tomb. Mark adds to that they were heading to the tomb to take care of the body and prepare it for burial. Now, as an aside, the fact that the women were the first witnesses of the resurrection is actually a really cool thing. How many women do I have in the house this morning? There you go. That's awesome. Some of you know that's a good thing, right? Here's why it's so awesome that the women were picked to be the first ones to testify about Jesus. Did you know that in Jesus' day, women were not considered credible witnesses in a court of law? They weren't allowed to talk. No one listened to them. They only listened to men because only men were credible. We all know that, how that worked out, right? But you know what it does? It gives an amazing amount of credibility to the resurrection story. Because if somebody made up the story about Jesus rising from the dead, they wouldn't have picked women to be the testifiers. They would have picked Peter or James or John or some other guy. The fact that the women were the ones that told the story means Jesus picked them, and it was part of the story. Anyway, back to the story. Jesus' body was placed in the tomb on Good Friday, right after he was crucified. But it was right before the Sabbath began, so they didn't have time to properly prepare the body. And you're not allowed to work on the Sabbath, so they couldn't prepare the body over the course of the Sabbath until sundown on Saturday. By the time sundown happened, they might have had time to run to the store and get what they needed to prepare the body, but by then it was late at night and it was not safe to head to the cemetery to take care of Jesus' body, so they had to wait another night. So first thing in the morning, they're on their way to the tomb. They certainly didn't expect a resurrection. We know they were probably overcome with grief because they get halfway to the tomb and it dawns on them, who's going to move the stone? We can't do it. It's too big. There's no way we can get it out of our way. You know, in a way, the stone reminds us of life's insurmountable problems and barriers for us that block our way. They're too big for us to move. We don't know what we can do with them. But these women arrive at the tomb and we're told there's a violent earthquake. And the women look up and see that the stone is already rolled back. You know what that tells us? That tells us we should always remember that God takes care of our barriers even when we can't or don't even know they're coming. Because that's what God did for them. But these women, man, they don't know if the stone being moved is good news or bad news. Think about it. Everything they had faced over the course of that week, especially the last 3 days, I'm thinking they were erring to the side it was bad news that the stone was moved. And here's what I mean by that. As they approach the tomb and their hearts are pounding and their curiosity's building, they're probably thinking somebody stole the body. Or somebody desecrated the body. Or somebody might still be in the tomb. And they don't know what to expect. And then they see this angel sitting on a stone, and the text tells us that the Roman guards were so afraid they were like dead men. And I'm sure the women were afraid as well. And the angel does what all angels do when they show up on earth. They lead with, do not be afraid, right? Because clearly people are afraid when the angels show up. But this angel doesn't stop there. He gives a two-part message to these ladies. The first part of the message is, I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He's been raised from the dead. Now, I'm sure they haven't even wrapped their minds around what that angel had just said, because it isn't what they expected. And I'm sure the angel could read it on their face because he goes on to say, look, here's where they laid the body. The implication is, look at this place. The body is gone because the body is risen. It is arguably the most important part of the story. And here's the thing, if the resurrection actually didn't happen, we got to explain a lot of other things that we know. For example, how do you explain the empty tomb? Some people argue that while the Roman soldiers were sleeping, the disciples came and stole the body. Now let me tell you why that's probably not realistic. Did you know that if a Roman soldier was caught sleeping while on duty, he was executed? It's not like coming to church and listening to the pastor where you can fall asleep. We're not going to kill you. But if they fell asleep on duty, they were killed. But let's say they fell asleep. You don't think for a second as these disciples showed up and moved this giant stone away from the tomb, they would have woke up? Think about how loud that would have been as they were trying to do that. And before we even get to that point, let's look at the disciples for a second. These guys, they were afraid for their lives, right? They went into hiding. They scattered because Jesus was killed, right? I'm not sure they have it in them to go and move the stone and steal the body with the Roman soldiers standing right there. And if we fast forward and read accounts of what happened to the disciples later on, we're told that most of the disciples were killed because they were preaching Jesus rose from the dead. You don't think that if that was made up, one of them would have caved when they were being tortured and said, I stole the body. Here's where you can find it. right? They didn't do that. Now, some people say other groups stole the body. Maybe the religious leaders or maybe the Roman soldiers themselves stole the body. Well, if that was the case, the religious leaders and the Romans had an issue with this Christianity movement. All they had to do to kill the whole movement was to produce the body. If they stole it, they never did. Why? Because he had risen. Also, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, what about all the appearances Jesus made before he ascended into heaven? How do we account for those? He showed up to individual people. He showed up to a couple people. He showed up to a group of 500. All those people were still alive. If it wasn't true, you think one of them might have said, he wasn't really there. It's just a story. And again, back to the disciples. Think about the amazing change that happened in their life. I mean, think about it. They went into hiding because they were afraid for their lives. And a few weeks later, they start preaching that Jesus rose from the dead in the same city where Jesus was killed. Something happened to them that changed who they were. They saw Jesus. That's the news that these women encountered on that first Easter morning. When they saw the angel, when they stepped inside the tomb. He is risen. And because he is risen, they have something they're supposed to go and do, which brings us to the second part of the angel's message, which is go and tell the disciples. You see, these women were the first believers that were told to go and tell people about Jesus. Go and tell is what Jesus stressed from the time he rose from the dead till the time he ascended into heaven. He said, go and make disciples. You will be my witnesses. It's a mandate for the whole church. Because Christ is alive, we are commissioned to go and tell others. So the first part of the angel's message is, he is risen. The second part of the angel's message is, go and tell. Spread the news. Again, Christianity could have been stopped right there if somebody just had produced the body. But nobody could. No such body has ever turned up. Now, I don't know about you, but I have yet to meet a person who has come to me and said, I'm going to die, and in 3 days, I'm going to come back to life, and then did it. If anybody ever comes to you and tells you that they're going to die, and in 3 days come back to life, and they proceed to do it, I suggest you listen to whatever they say. I think it's a pretty good idea. He has risen. Go and tell. Not only is that good advice for us as individuals, that is great advice for us as a church. Christ is risen. Go tell others. We shouldn't be afraid to tell other people about the difference that Christ has made in our lives. We shouldn't be afraid to invite them to a place like this church so they can meet other people who Christ is working in their lives, so they can grow in their faith. You see, the reaction of the women at the empty tomb is twofold. They have fear and they have joy. That's kind of our own reaction, isn't it, when we experience the risen Christ? In the face of uncertainty, in the face of doubt, sometimes we have fear, and sometimes we find comfort and joy. You see, these women were overwhelmed. They were dumbfounded. They were full of awe. They were full of wonder. The angel tells them to go tell the disciples. The fact that we read that this morning, the fact that we're preaching on it all these years later, tells us they did what they were told to do. Tell the disciples to go to Galilee. Jesus will be there and meet them there. You see, we should never forget Jesus promises to go ahead of us and meet us where he tells us to go. So no matter what the future holds for us, whether it's individually or as a church, individually, if the future holds for you a relationship or a job or a calling because God is leading you somewhere, that's great. As a church, if it's a new building or a satellite campus or a new partnership to do mission work somewhere in the community, that's great. It doesn't matter what path we're following if it's the path that God has put in front of us, because if God has put the path in front of us, we're promised Christ is going to be ahead of us and walking with us every step of the way. And we can never lose sight of that. You know, back to our story from Matthew, Jesus lived up to the promise. He met the disciples there, and then he commissioned them to go and make disciples of all nations. It's called the Great Commission. Here's the deal. The Great Commission is not a suggestion. It's a commandment. We're all supposed to do that. We're all called to share the good news of salvation with the world, inviting others to experience the love and grace of God. Here at Christ Church, we believe community outreach is a vital aspect of fulfilling the Great Commission. You see, that includes helping fight against food insecurity, like we've been talking about. That includes providing health and wellness initiatives, education initiatives so people can grow in their faith, providing for people who have experienced disasters in their life. It's actually part of our vision. We call it Mission 10-10-10. That stands for $10 million, 10,000 people over 10 years to missions and outreach in our community. I'm pleased to share with you that we're 4 years in and we have done a little over $2.3 million towards that initiative, which is awesome. Here's why it's important. By meeting the practical needs of our neighbors, those ministry avenues give us an opportunity to share the love of Christ and to invite other people into a deeper relationship with God through Jesus. And as I said, you've heard me share for the last several weeks about how we are stepping out to fight against food insecurity in our community, and it is here in our community. It's part of our 10-year vision. I want you to take a look at this video to maybe better understand what that really means. Take a look.
Do I touch it?
Yeah, go ahead. What is it?
All right. What's your favorite food ever? This is tough. Salad, mac and cheese, pancakes, and popcorn.
My dad's steak.
Pizza, so good.
What food do you dislike most? I hate cheese.
Vegetables, spinach.
Tomatoes.
What's a face you make when you eat raw tomato?
I don't eat it at all.
What do you do when someone gives you food you don't like? Play with it until it got cold. I'll say, hey, what's that? They look that way.
Because if it was gross, then why would I want to eat it?
Did you know that 1 out of every 5 kids doesn't have enough food to eat? 1 out of 5. 1 out of every 5 kids.
Can you turn the bag around and look at the other side?
Oh.
I didn't know it was in America.
I don't know what to say to that. Makes me feel bad. Makes me want to cry. Wow.
That's a lot of kids.
It's kind of unfair because some people have too much stuff and some people have too little.
For me, I always get to eat lunch. And if that's a meal that I'm missing, I would feel very disappointed.
It makes me feel like, what are we gonna do to fix this?
What is something we can do to help fight hunger together?
So over there we have a wall with tons of ideas, and we want to add your idea to the wall.
Kids could think, oh, that's not possible, or oh, I'm too young to do this. But it is possible, and you're not too young to do it.
Donate money as much as I can.
Make Thanksgiving every day.
We should all get a group and try to find the foods that would be easiest to give.
And we can take the food to homes where they don't have food.
That's a small way to have a big effect.
Post videos about children not being able to eat.
Everyone brings canned food, and they build a big fort, and then they donate all the canned food.
And then they could have everything for free.
If there was some machine that could make food, my machine would change it to 0 out of 5 kids being hungry.
The tiniest ripples make the biggest waves. If all the kids in the world got together and did something big, they could impact the whole world.
When you came into worship this morning, you were given a handout. If you're worshiping online, you can go to christumc.net and you can find the same handout. It's got a lot of cool stuff in it that we're going to do in the spring and summer, and we want to get you involved in as much as we possibly can. But on the inside, I want you to take a look. There's a whole section devoted to what we are calling Feed the Berg. And there's lots of different opportunities that are part of Feed the Berg so that as a church we can actually make a difference as we fight against food insecurity like you heard in that video and that we have in our community. So I want you to take some time this week and look at all those different opportunities. There's going to be more opportunities that are coming throughout the year. It's going to be in front of you all the time. But I want to draw your attention to one particular thing called Fill a Truck. If you've been part of Christ Church before, you know we've done Fill a Truck for years. We do it the first weekend of April, and the week before, we give you all brown bags and you bring food back, and we put it all in a truck and we send it to Shim because they're doing really good work to handle food insecurity in the South Hills. This year, we're ramping it up a little bit. We're not going to give you bags. We're giving you a list of what Shim needs for their food pantry. And I want to encourage you from now until May 5th to buy as much of that food as you can. Bring it in the bags that you buy it, and bring it to the worship service that you come to, because we're going to have a little friendly competition to see which worship service brings in the most food, right? And here's why we're going to do it. It's because it's a competition of generosity. And our goal is to fill an entire semi-truck on that first weekend in May. So bring that. There's going to be grocery carts actually available at all the worship services for you to place your food items in. And we're going to do it all through April, along with all the other things you can do to learn about how we can fight against food insecurity. So we can get past that whole 1 out of 5 kids doesn't know what they're going to eat. And all kids can have something to eat, because we got to do better to make a difference in our community. You see, Jesus assured his disciples of his authority and his promises to be with them always, to the very end of the age. That assurance wasn't just for his disciples then, that assurance is for all of the people that follow him now. So we can take comfort and have knowledge that Christ is with us every step of the way. We got the best message in the world. We know Jesus is alive. We have experienced him in our own lives. But when it comes to speaking out and telling people about him, sometimes we kind of get afraid and lose our voice. Jesus says in Matthew, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. You see, because he has risen, we have everything it takes to share that message with other people. We are promised that he will help us accomplish everything he asks us to do. That's not anything new for Christ Church. Christ Church has been doing that for generations. The Feed the Burg initiative actually helps us fulfill our call to take Jesus to the ends of the earth, like we're called to do as part of the Great Commission, because sometimes we need to meet people's physical needs, because that opens the door to people's greatest need, which is a relationship with God through Jesus. Our vision allows us to live into why we exist as a church, building inclusive community, sharing Christ transforming love. Won't you join us? Let's pray. Lord, we are so grateful that your son beat death, and because he beat death, we can have life. Lord, help us to receive that gift. Help us to let it change who we are. And help us to share that with everybody that we meet. And Lord, as you provide opportunities for us to meet their physical needs, let us do that and then use that as a platform to meet their greatest need, which is a relationship with you. Thank you for sending your son. Thank you for offering us the greatest gift in the history of the world. Help us to receive that gift and give us the courage to share it with everybody that we meet. We ask all of this in your son's most precious name, and everyone said,